Hello, and welcome to SFCLT's Steps to an Acquisition from Evaluation of Site Suitability to the Close of Escrow and Major Milestones and everything in between. My name is Kristen Villalobos. I am the broker at the San Francisco Community Land Trust and the Acquisitions Director, and I'm excited to take you through a high-level overview of everything it takes to get from the beginning to the end of an acquisition. A little disclaimer, this session is presented for informational and educational purposes only. The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed herein are those of myself, the presenter, and do not necessarily reflect the views of SFCLT. And the information presented is for educational purposes and should not be considered a substitute for professional or legal advice. A little bit about the Land Trust. SFCLT first formed in 2003. We have 16 buildings in our portfolio with 180 units of permanently affordable housing. Our properties are all in San Francisco, and we also lend technical support to other CLTs and small developers across the Bay Area, including brokerage services. So I will help you in your acquisition. I am a licensed broker in the state of California. And it is, I will say, quite helpful to work with a broker who understands the intricacies of affordable housing purchases. They are slightly more complicated than the standard investment purchase. Okay, so we're going to go through the major milestones in a transaction. And there is the pre-contract milestones and then the escrow process itself. So today we will talk about identifying a potential building, property investigations, tenant engagement in that before we go into contract, building a pro forma, lining up the capital stack, negotiating the contract. Then, assuming all goes well, we get into contract. The escrow process begins when we ratify the contract. Everybody signs it. We open escrow with a neutral third-party escrow company. Then the first milestone would be removing the inspection contingency, followed by removing the appraisal contingency, the big one, removing the finance contingency, and then finally closing escrow. Once we close escrow, we have to transfer this building to property management, either third party or in-house at your organization, and then also transferring it over to asset management. And just to say today, it's all fairly high level. We won't get deep into the weeds, but we'll just go through the basics. Okay, starting with property investigations. Find a building, you think you like it, so let's get all the information on it. You can pull the tax information, go to your planning department website and look up the complaint history. If there are any notices of violation on the building, you'll find this in county records. If you're working with a broker, they have access to the multiple listing service or the MLS. They can go and look there for information, and then also look under city or county complaint sites. This is because you want to know basically the physical health of the building, and all of those things will give you some pretty good ideas. Then, working with a broker, hopefully, they will compile a property sale history. They will run a comparative market analysis to determine the present market day value of that building. And then they can also reach out to the listing agent or seller and obtain the rent rolls, the leases, all of the income and expense information so that you can begin to assess the financial health of that building. You're also going to want to visit the property and check out the physical condition with your own eyes. We are looking for what might be major expenses. Does the roof need replacing? Does the electrical need updating? Is there any seismic needs, depending on where you are, how big the building is? Maybe there need to be some increased measures on the foundation. Do the windows need replacing? That's a major expense if you have a building big enough with enough windows. So you really want to be looking at all of these things. You're also looking for any in-unit issues that might present a challenge for moving forward. Are there tenants who are collectors of things? Are there tenants who might have cleanliness issues where there could be pest issues that might go not only affect that unit, but affect the units around it? So these are all things you want to know going into the building. Also, during this period of time, it's great to educate the listing team on the process and the timeline for an affordable housing purchase. We generally take longer than the average investment buyer. And we also will often do more inspections and more property visits than the average buyer. So it's great to inform the listing team and the seller up front of what it's going to mean. There will be multiple requests to get in there. It is going to take a bit longer. It's just best if everybody knows and they're not surprised along the way, so you're kind of managing expectations. Tenant engagement. Essential piece. You really want to make sure that the tenants want you to buy their building. Affordable housing is more involved than just your typical rental, especially if there are going to be income certifications required. So it's really important to know that the tenants want you to be there. Now, in San Francisco, we have this great law called the Community Opportunity to Purchase Act, which gives us the right to get tenant contact information before a building goes to market. A really invaluable tool. Not every locale is going to have that access to the tenants outlined by law. And in fact, most sellers and listing agents are fairly leery of giving you access to the tenants ahead of writing a contract. So you may have to get creative in how you do your tenant engagement. Maybe sending postcards to the building ahead of time, introducing yourself and asking them to call you, or even door knocking. But let's just assume you have access to the tenants. So you want to start by calling or texting all of the tenants to introduce your organization and explain what a purchase would mean for them if you were to make that purchase. Door knock as needed to make contact. I attempt to identify a captain in the building. Now, this might be a tenant who is enthusiastic about the purchase. Hopefully, it's a tenant who's lived there for some time. They know their neighbors, and they can do a lot of your legwork for you. It's also very helpful for someone being introduced to the idea of affordable housing coming in. If it's a trusted neighbor coming to them with this information, they're going to be far more receptive than a stranger just cold cocking or cold calling or appearing on their doorstep. And then finally, holding a meeting is going to be a really valuable tool if you can do this. It's the best way to convey all of the information, answer all of the questions in the most efficient manner. You're really preserving your staff time and energy if you can get all of that done at once. It's also really useful for tenants. Their neighbor may have a question that they didn't think of, but is definitely information they want to have. So, really valuable to have a tenant meeting if you can manage to do so. So next up, building the pro forma and lining up the capital stack. Now, we actually have trainings on both of these things that goes in depth. So this is just a very high level overview. But this is an essential piece of putting together and getting ready to make an offer. You want to be projecting forward what your rehab and acquisitions costs are going to be. So this would be escrow fees, transfer taxes. Now, that's as applicable. It varies from locale to locale as to who pays it. In San Francisco, traditionally the seller pays the transfer tax. I know in the East Bay, it is typically split between the buyer and the seller. So each locale has its own custom regarding that. But you need to think about it. Legal fees. There are going to be inspection costs, property management fees to think about moving forward, the developer fee that hopefully you are getting for your organization folded into the cost of this project, construction costs. You also want to project the ongoing operating costs versus income of the building. So, can the income support the debt? Can the income be increased? This is something that you would be able to see more clearly once you have basic income information on all of the tenants and know who could afford a potential increase if that's what you need to be able to cover the debt service, or if people can't afford increases, something you need to know so that you are not projecting increases that the tenants cannot support. During this period of time, you will be meeting with lenders or meeting with a government entity if your money is coming from the government. to communicate your findings about this building and hopefully obtain a soft approval from them to make an offer. Now, the hard approval is, of course, the approval of the loan, which happens during the course of the escrow after you're in contract. But that soft approval is, think of it like a pre-approval from a lender. Essentially, they like the look of everything, and they say, go ahead, make an offer, and we can move towards an actual approval. And then also internally, you want to start to determine the starting negotiating point for your offer. We need to find out what is the market value, what can the building afford. I think I actually talk about the contract negotiations in a minute, so I won't get too much deeper. There we go. Contract negotiations. Okay, so affordable housing purchases are more complicated and they do take longer than traditional sales. So it really is important to start on the right foot, to project an image of competence and seriousness from the beginning. There is kind of an attitude towards affordable housing and government financed projects in the private market that you're going to have to overcome. It's just an unfortunate reality. But if you just show up very serious, and that's even serious in your offer. So that's where we get, you want to find a starting price point that's well enough below what you know your max offer could be, so that you have room to negotiate, but you do want to be sensitive to the seller's response. If you try too hard to get that bargain and you come in too low, you could either insult the seller right out the gate, or you could right out the gate give the impression to the seller that you're not serious. They're saying, hey, I know the market value is X, and you're coming to me and offering me, $300,000 below that. That's not serious. So you want to be careful about that initial offer. But you also don't want to go too high. You do want to leave room for negotiation. You don't necessarily want to start at your ceiling, because everybody likes to negotiate. It makes everyone feel like they're getting somewhere. And then, transparency in this process can be very helpful in building trust. Again, it's going back to having to overcome this attitude in the private market about these, government funded projects. So being really transparent about everything that's happening can be really helpful. Transparent about where your price is coming from, what the project can support, etc. I mean, obviously, it's a delicate dance. You don't want to show your entire hand, but I have found in my years of doing this, being really straightforward takes us very far in building trust. Okay, so assume everything went well. We were able to come to an agreement on price and terms. So now we're going to finalize the contract and open escrow. So ratified is the word to mean that everybody has signed that contract. Buyer has signed, seller has signed. So once we're ratified, we open the escrow with a third-party title company. We also want to immediately create a timeline of important dates for the transaction and send it out to all the parties to make sure that everybody is on the same page. You will wire an initial 3% deposit into escrow or as negotiated. We typically put in a 1% deposit on our purchases, and then we increase the deposit by an additional 2% when we remove the finance contingency. I think that this was originally born out of days when maybe there wasn't a lot of cash flow. But I have also found we really don't have any issue with it. Most sellers accept that, two-step deposit pretty easily. But if you have the cash, you have the 3%, maybe go ahead, just put it in at the beginning. Once that happens, the escrow team will order a preliminary title report. This is a report that basically shows the chain of title, the chain of ownership for the building. It also will give legal descriptions. Really important document to make sure it gets generated right away and everybody's looking at it and getting ahead of any discrepancies or items that might need correcting, because things like that can sometimes take time. We also want to introduce all parties via email, introducing the listing team to the escrow team to the lending team. Just make sure that everybody who needs to be in contact with one another are. Oh, yeah, so a little blurb over there. Once the contract and any addenda have been signed by both buyer and seller, the contract is ratified. Day one of the contract is the day after the last signature was placed. So sometimes the final signer is the buyer. Sometimes it's the seller, depending on where we were in negotiations going back and forth. But once that final signature has been placed, the following day is day one. So all dates start at day one, the day after ratification. All right, we're off to the races. Our first milestone is the inspection contingency removal, also known as the due diligence period. We write these for 30 days. Generally, that's going to be enough time for you to get it all done. If you feel you need more time, perhaps try for it. But I will say, the shortest you can get these periods, the better things are going to go for you with the seller. Because again, our transactions are typically 120-day transactions from the beginning. That's 4 months. On the private market, a multi-unit building transaction generally is done in 30 to 60 days. I mean, of course, everything varies. Bigger buildings might take more time, portfolios take more time, et cetera. But for the most part, they're about half the time that ours take. So always want to be mindful of not taking more time than you need. Okay, so first 30 days, inspection removal, due diligence. Immediately upon ratifying, I'm going to start scheduling the inspections and coordinate with the listing team and the tenants for entry. Um, Typical inspections that we do on all of our buildings is roof, structural. We actually get a structural engineer out, pest inspection, a general home or building inspection, sewer lateral inspection, plumbing inspection, electrical, lead paint testing, asbestos testing, phase one environmental, which is basically a history of the property, and you're trying to find out if there was ever something on or near that property that could potentially contaminate the soil, such as a history of a dry cleaner, or maybe there was a gas station next door. Okay. You're also going to get an Alta survey done and a zoning report done. This is a very important piece for obtaining title insurance at the end of your transaction. In San Francisco, we do an underground storage tank inspection as well. You may not need that in other locales, but it's basically left over from the period of time before electricity when gas lamps were used in buildings, and there would be these underground storage tanks. They can potentially be an environmental hazard, so good to know if they're there. And then finally, we also will get a CNA, Certified Needs Assessment slash Reserve Study done. Basically, this is a report that projects 20 years of expenses so that we can appropriately set aside funding to make sure that we can meet the needs of the building in the years ahead. So it's a lot. It's a lot of inspections. I usually try very hard to get all of those inspections done on either just 1 or 2 days. So it can be a bit of a madhouse with multiple inspectors, but given how many inspections you have, it really is the most efficient way to get it done. So do try to put them all together if you can. Review the inspections as the reports as they come in, and then coordinate payment for all of those reports. Keep a spreadsheet of expenses throughout the transaction. Not only is the spreadsheet going to help make sure that everybody gets paid, but later on at the end of the transaction, when you are getting ready for closing, you want to have a nice, tidy account of the money that you have spent that you either need reimbursement for or just need to, assign the budget appropriately. Also, during this period, you're going to review, sign, and return the disclosure package to the listing team. The disclosure package is something the seller will give you, and it is basically all of their knowledge of the property. There are typically a number of documents that are kind of quote unquote boilerplate documents that are put out by the local Realtors Association that just cover all of the typical things that any transaction will have. But in there, there will also be some questionnaires with very specific property information that the seller needs to fill out. The rule being, if the seller must disclose every single material fact they know about that property to you. Now, there are sometimes exceptions to this if the seller is like a trustee who doesn't necessarily have a lot of knowledge of the property. There may be paperwork that says that and then basically says we don't know much about it. You need to do your own investigations. But there's always going to be a disclosure package full of information about the building. So also during this time, you will review the preliminary title report and alert the listing team to any title issues that may exist. Maybe sometimes there's a name that seems a little off, or there was some chain of transfer between LLCs or between trusts, and something wasn't clean. And so your title company will also work with you, or they'll work with the seller to correct anything that needs correcting. Oh, also, notice of violations would also show up on potentially on the preliminary title report. So that's another good thing to know about. Any notices of violations on the property, the seller typically needs to clear those before transferring, unless it's some major rehab project that you plan to be doing. And then you would make an agreement between the two of you that they are able to transfer the property with that violation still there because you are taking responsibility as the buyer. Okay, so assume we made it through the inspection contingency. We lifted it. There was no need to renegotiate price because everything, I'm going to go back to the slide. No need to renegotiate price because, everything was within the parameters of the projections you had made going out. Occasionally, this might be a point of renegotiation of price. If something came up that you hadn't realized, some major expense, and it's not going to work anymore for you to be able to do that work with the current price, maybe you have to renegotiate. But I would say generally, it's best if you need to change terms, if you need to renegotiate a price, the deeper into the transaction you can get, the better. So there have been times when maybe we've realized that we might need to renegotiate at this point, but we know there's still room for us to maybe do that later when we're lifting finance, and so we'll choose to do that. But again, be very careful with this, not giving legal advice right now, but I will just say that the deeper into a transaction we get, the more committed every party becomes to seeing it through to conclusion. So I do always try to keep that in mind. Okay, so next up is the appraisal removal. Um, Typically, the lender will order the appraisal. Sometimes when we're working with the city or county, they will ask us to go ahead and get the appraisal working. So you want to know very soon who is going to be ordering that appraisal because we do want to make sure that that is set in motion pretty much right away as soon as you get approved. We always write for a 45-day appraisal removal period because appraisals can take a little more time. Um, you might be able to get it done faster. It depends on the appraiser you're working with. But our appraisals also take more time because they're affordable housing appraisals. And you do want to make sure that you're working with an appraiser who has that knowledge and experience to be able to do one for affordable housing. Okay, so you just want to make sure that's happening and then schedule a visit for them. You will provide the appraiser with all the information they ask for, comparative market analysis from your agent. You can also ask the listing agent for this. They certainly have a vested interest in getting the appraiser all the information they need and getting a good appraisal. So the listing team can be good partners in this part of the process. You also will provide them with the contract, the income and expense information, the rent rolls, all of your reports. Just be transparent. You want them to appraise it as best they can. This is not a time to try to manipulate anything about the appraisal. Um, Price may need to be renegotiated once the appraisal is in. Unfortunate reality, if the appraisal comes in below the price, your lender and or the government entity are very likely not going to want to fund that project at a price above the appraisal. So it may be that you have to renegotiate. There is a reality in which you could potentially, your org could cover any gap if the seller is not being cooperative. Though, of course, you may want to be mindful about taking that course of action. Probably best not to overpay. If it's not appraising at the price that you're in, you're probably not at the right price. So, good idea to renegotiate. Okay, so let's just assume we got through the appraisal removal. We are now In the finance removal period. So typically in our transactions, we write a 90-day finance removal. Now, it does say here that this is the period between 60 and 90 days, though really you're working on all of this from the beginning. The finance is the big one. There's going to be a lot of hoops to jump through. So this process starts at the beginning, but basically, once the appraisal's gone, this is now the only thing you're focused on. So, tenant income certifications. Early in the transaction, you want to provide a list of documents to the tenants, the documents you're going to need from them. You're going to provide them with copies of the forms that we're going to be asking them to sign. And also, you want to give them a copy of the lease. So, this is assuming you are going to be signing a new lease with all of the tenants with your organization upon acquisition. Provide them with a copy of that lease. You want to give people plenty of time to review this information. Typically, you are going to be in a crunch period at the end where you are begging people to get things done, but you really want to give everyone as much time as you can. You don't want them to feel rushed any more than is necessary. Encourage early submittal of the income docs because, again, there's almost always kind of a rush at the end to get things done. But the more you can do to get this process done early, the better your life is going to be. You're going to update and finalize the pro forma based on the inspection reports that have come in, the tenant income certs. Remember, this would be pertaining to rent increases. Can you increase based on tenant income? Some of them can afford a little bit. That's where you can do it, or that you can't increase rent because people are already rent burdened. If there are any increased construction costs that need to be accounted for now that you have all your reports in. At this point, hopefully you've also been shopping for insurance. And so if the insurance costs are higher than you thought they would be, maybe you're making adjustments to your pro forma. So yeah, over here on the side, I have you want to be shopping for insurance to obtain costs and begin the process for having coverage because you do need to have coverage set up upon close of escrow. We use an insurance broker. I highly recommend working with a broker. They know what they're doing. Usually, if you're working with a government entity, they're going to give you a list of insurance requirements, and it's really just so useful to be able to hand that off to a professional and have them go find it for you. So, highly recommend that. Also, during this period of time, you're going to finalize the Alta survey and the zoning report. Both of those reports, once ordered, will come to you as drafts. You're going to send them to the title company and also to your legal, and everyone's going to check everything. They're going to check the Alta survey, which I just realized I haven't explained the Alta survey, I don't believe, but basically surveyors will come out to the property and it is assessing, it's basically setting the parameters of the property. They'll also be looking for things like, easements and if there's a deck that is over the line, things like that, things that need to get worked out in the preliminary title report. So, but you'll send that report out. Once everyone says it's good, you will go ahead and get it finalized, which means it's signed and sealed. It's a very important thing that must be done before close of escrow. All right, continuing in our steps to finance removal. During this whole process, the government entity and or lender will each have their internal meetings. They have committees that will be, giving approval. So it's common for those dates to change. And it's very important for you as the buyer organization to be proactive and responsive. Basically assume that things are not going to happen on time, they're not going to go as smoothly. And there's not a lot you can do about that. You can't do anything about their committee dates changing, but what you can control is your piece of things. And so, always just be very responsive, be proactive, be thinking ahead to what might be asked for, what might be needed, and be ready to answer very quickly. So, once the green light is obtained, so the lender or the government entity has approved your project, you have the funding approval, you can now remove the finance contingency. For us, this also means that we're increasing our deposit because we always do that two-part deposit. If that's not something that you negotiated, then you don't need to worry about that. But it's very important to know that Once this, oh gosh, I just realized a typo on my presentation. I apologize. Once the finance contingency has been removed, the transaction is considered pending. Please forgive that it says inspection contingency there. Once the finance contingency has been removed, the transaction is considered pending. So once a project is pending, the full deposit is technically non-refundable at this point. So it is a very serious moment in the transaction. You want to make sure that you are fully good to go before you remove that because your deposit is technically not refundable. I'll also say there may be pressure, if you're not getting your approval on time from the government or the lender, there may be a lot of pressure from the seller to go ahead and remove that finance contingency because it's a very important moment for them because they know this transaction is good. This sale is happening. I am definitely selling this property. And if not, I get a deposit. So there is sometimes pressure, but it's very important to not take this step until you have been guaranteed of your funding. Okay, so we removed finance contingency. We are pending. We are now in our final days of getting ready to close escrow. So here it shows 90 to 120 days. This is the last 30 days after we've removed finance, and now we're getting ready to close. So during this period of time, you're going to want to review your file, make sure that you have all of the required documents and reports, that you've received everything, you've reviewed everything, you've approved everything. You're going to check with the listing team to ensure that any regionally required inspections have been conducted. Typically, this is a seller responsibility. In San Francisco, we have a water and energy efficiency inspection that happens at every transaction, every time a building crosses hands, switches hands, they have to do this energy and water inspection. In the East Bay, there is a sewer lateral inspection that is required. So regionally, there are different inspections required. You also want to ensure that the escrow team has received the rent roll and security deposit information from the seller because they will be doing calculations. Typically, if you're closing mid-month, they're going to be transferring the part of the rent that falls under your ownership to you. They'll be transferring the security deposit to you. Any security deposit interest that has accumulated on those security deposits will also be transferred to you, depending on your locale. You may have to pay the tenants out interest on their security deposit on a yearly or ongoing basis. You also want to coordinate internally on LLC creation. SFCLT always takes ownership of our buildings in an LLC that we create just to hold title to that building. Good practice protects the org, so you do need to create that LLC. You'll also be coordinating on your legal document creation and review. Hopefully, you are working with an independent legal counsel if you don't have legal on your own team. During this period of time, you also will be signing new leases with your tenants, assuming that that is what your organization wants to do. You will also potentially be lining up a notarized signing of an SNDA. This is a subordinate agreement if there is a commercial tenant. Typically, your lender will want them to sign the subordinate agreement that basically lays out the terms of their tenancy in the event that your organization defaults on the loan. You're also going to want to alert property management. If you are using a third-party property management or your own team, if it's internal, send them the relevant property information so they are geared up and ready to take over the property. You'll also want to introduce them to the tenants. You're also going to make sure that the escrow team orders an updated prelim because our transactions are so lengthy. You do need to usually order a new preliminary title report so that it is dated within 30 days of your closing. You're going to ensure that your insurance is in place and will be effective upon close of escrow. Obviously, this is a very important piece. You must have insurance coverage from day one. All right. You will coordinate internally to prepare the closing draw. Now, the closing draw is essentially the request for funding from the lender or the government entity. It's for the reimbursements, it's for the purchase price and the escrow fees and all of those expenses that you took on in purchasing this building. You also will be opening bank accounts ready for this property. It will need an operating account, potentially a vacancy reserve account, or the operating reserve account. You're going to potentially need to set up business registration. We have to do that when we get money from the city. If the city is paying us, then we need to be registered as a business. So that's something we have to do ahead of closing. You'll also, during this period of time, ensure that clear communication is ongoing between all parties. We want to make sure that the listing agent and seller is talking to the escrow company, that the escrow company is speaking with the lender and/or government entity, that basically everyone is connected, everyone is talking, everyone is moving towards moving all of their individual pieces towards our goal of closing. Then finally, towards the very end, you're going to work with the escrow company to coordinate notarized signings of the closing docs with whoever is signing for your organization. Make sure that they're doing it with the seller. Okay, so I feel like I lost a slide of we've closed escrow. Hooray! Okay, so additional thoughts on the process and the challenges. So I always try to leave outs for us in case things get sticky, in case we get to the end of a transaction and there's delays and the seller's frustrated and they're starting to threaten, notices of we're going to send you a 2-day notice to perform. It helps if they have not given you specific disclosure items, or if there's just things that were maybe supposed to happen along the way that didn't happen. If push comes to shove, being able to say, well, actually, you didn't do this thing. So now you're telling me I have to do this thing. I need you to do this other thing first. It's often something as simple as they just didn't provide, a disclosure about a specific part of the building. But I've learned over the years that it's always nice to just have something in my back pocket. So if some point along the way they don't do something that maybe they're supposed to do, I file that away and I keep it just in case we need to pull it out later. Hopefully, we don't have to pull these things out, but it's just a good idea to keep in mind. Another thing to keep in mind is communication and relationships are everything in these transactions. We are more difficult to deal with than the average buyer. We have delays on already long timelines. We have a lot of hoops to jump through. So keeping things positive in this relationship is really essential. At the end of the day, we all have the same goal. We want to close escrow, and we just have to keep reminding ourselves and our cooperative broker partners of this fact, especially if things get frustrating, especially if we have delays, if we have, lots of requests. Things always pop up. Just trying to keep things positive is the best way forward. Once things become contentious, it is hard to keep moving forward. And there are a lot of emotions to manage in a real estate transaction. You would think that the professionals would not succumb to these emotional outbursts, but unfortunately they do. We're all human, and these deals can be tough to get through. So I always try to just stay friends, stay positive. Okay, remember the delays will happen at every step in the process. Anticipate a delay and lay the groundwork for navigating an upset listing team or seller. You want to be proactive every step of the way. Think of all the ways that things can go wrong and have a plan to handle it. Overkill is good in these transactions. It's good to overthink and just be ready. That's the thing about real estate transactions, even regular real estate transactions that are not affordable housing. It never ceases to surprise me, the new and interesting challenges that can come up. So you just need to have a flexible, positive attitude and just tackle each challenge as, simply a bump to get over, and know that we're going to get over the bump. We always get over the bumps. All right. Well, thank you. Happy buying. Again, Kristen Villalobos. I'm the acquisitions director for SFCLT. I hope that this was interesting for you. I hope this was informative. And thank you so much for sticking with me.